You are listening to The Audit, presented by IT Audit Labs. Today we are joined by IT Audit Labs team member Nick McLean to speak with our guest, Leah McLean. Leah represents a strong female lead in the cybersecurity world, wearing many hats, notably as the Vice President, Cybersecurity Specialist at Mastercard Data and Services, and the co-founder and board advisor for the Whole Cyber Human Initiative. You are listening to The Audits. As usual, my name's Eric Brown, and Nick McLean from IT Audit Labs is with us today, and joining us is Leah McLean. So thanks so much for being on, Leah. It's a pleasure to have you, and really excited to talk to you about some of these topics today.
No, thank you, Eric and Nick. Appreciate being part of this. Thank you.
Well, Leah, do you want to just give us a little background on what it is you do day to day?
Sure. So I have been at Mastercard for just under 2 years now. I'm a vice president of cybersecurity specialist. I'm actually within a business unit, and part of that business unit is a cybersecurity practice that's fairly newer. And so my day to day, it's really never a dull moment. But I am currently focused on helping to build out more capabilities in our cyber risk quantification approach. And there's just a lot of collaboration I do with different teams and business units to really, understand like where mutual goals are, where we can help each other create efficiencies, look for ways to improve how we work with customers and partners, and also, the technologies that we're using across the board and where they could be leveraged. And then, of course, monitoring the current threats globally, consistently, and lately a lot of contract reviews and a lot of time with the legal team.
Do you approach security maybe differently than you did at other companies that maybe weren't at the forefront?
I would say yes, just in terms of from the other companies I've been at in my career, they've been on the vendor side in cybersecurity. So it has been pretty different to see coming from, a cyber vendor company and what they're doing in security, as well as even like the CISO role there sometimes was more of an evangelist. And then to an organization, a brand everybody knows, financial services is considered critical infrastructure. And just to see the breadth of the security that we have. And it's interesting because our cybersecurity team is responsible for both physical security as well.
Oh, interesting.
One thing I've definitely had to learn in my time here is that whole financial services ecosystem. So we are the card provider, but then there's like all the ecosystem of players that do the processing, the banks, right, the merchants. So it's yeah. I didn't realize that until I worked here, but I think unless you're in this sector, it is complex, but it's interesting to see how it all works.
We've been on the other side of that, helping companies go through their PCI audits. Yep. And now going from 3.2.1 to 4.0 is certainly something that's, I believe, top of mind for a lot of the larger organizations that are going to have to do an ROC or an AOC to be compliant. And one of the things that we do is pen test as part of that, looking at the cardholder data. And some of the things Nick does is the social engineering on the physical side. So that's now that you have responsibility of both physical and the cyber piece, do you do tests where you're trying to see if somebody can get in with a UPS uniform on and plug something into a network jack and kind of that level of detail?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have our fair amount of testing. I can't speak broadly about, much more. But yeah, we definitely do. We have all of our groups under our different security orgs have quite a bit of testing that we're doing, obviously.
Well, I love the social engineering aspect. And, I think with the social engineering and the penetration testing and all the stuff that goes into protecting the organization, that brings up the public relations portion as well. Yeah. Leah, are you able to comment on how you navigate those waters when it can get a little bit tricky?
Good question. So, I mean, I'm not personally within that realm at our company. And,
Sure.
So I can't really speak to that necessarily, but I mean, I will definitely say that, we are seeing more and more come out in the news, right? And I think it's just important to, and I personally, my background in my career, while it's always been in IT and security, it's hasn't always been to where I am at today. So I actually started my career in PR and marketing. And so, right, PR by definition, right, is how do we get the information out to the public that's factual and informative, and backed up and supported by the data. So I think it's important for us to, realize what we do see in the news. We hope it's all correct and accurate, but it's not always. It's less reactions in terms of, well, they didn't have this, they didn't have that. And then it takes to Twitter and it goes down a whole nother rat hole. And instead, what can we learn from that, right? Because no one is 100% safe. And so instead of the blaming and pointing fingers, how can we actually just look at the facts, look at the data, understand what happened to one company, one team, and how that, transfolded, and then also what can we take away from that, and where can we share with others so that, we're all going to be compromised at some point, but how can we minimize that and continue to educate each other? So I think that needs to be really the main focus, and what I think we can learn when we do hear more and more of these incidences coming to the public.
So like spending more time on the offense versus the defense being more reactionary. Yeah, absolutely. You said one portion there that you said I kind of want to dive in on is you were in the public relations marketing, if I picked up on that correctly, and you branched to cybersecurity. Can you give us a little background on yourself, how you got there, what makes it tick, and how you got to this point?
Yeah. So, I mean, prior to living in Texas, I actually grew up in California, Silicon Valley. So I was surrounded by technology, right?
Oh, sure.
But yeah, my career path was definitely non-traditional. So I did start in PR and marketing, but I was always working for IT and networking companies. And technology was really interesting to me. But I was also that type of person that in order to fully understand the technology so that I could write about it or position it in simple terms, I had to get my hands on the tech. So I'd go to the engineering teams and basically ask them to show me how it worked, right? Like, I understand the what, now let me see the how. And they loved it because they were always looking for more help. And so they would teach me. And then when I was at Cisco, I was there for just over 3 years. They acquired their first cybersecurity company, SourceFire. And they had asked if I wanted to move to cyber. So, I mean, at the time it was a little daunting, but it was also fascinating to me. And so I said yes, and I never looked back. And
awesome.
Since then, I've kind of put my OSINT skills I gained in PR and marketing to use.
As you were transitioning through that PR piece and, moving in up through the management ranks and having responsibility for security across multiple domains, getting that awareness out not only to the staff, but the larger organization and then the public, depending on the organization that you're with. Well, as we look at some of the recent attacks, right? Most attacks, if they're not nation state, then usually they're based from a financial perspective. The malicious actors are looking to do something to get money. And we've seen a lot of ACH fraud recently. And going through that conversation to educate people and not necessarily place the blame within the organization, but try to raise that awareness up. Have you found strategies that have worked, that have allowed organizations to talk about breaches when they happen? I've personally seen where something happens and then the compliance piece of the organization, the legal teams come together, the insurance company gets involved, and then it's just mum's the word, and it's really difficult to talk about what's happening and even to let your peers in other industries know what's going on so that they can protect themselves, because everyone's so worried about the downstream effects legally of protected information getting out. Can you comment at all about any successes that you've had in breaking down that stereotype and breaking down the ability to be able to communicate and share with others what's going on so that everybody can be protected?
Yeah, I mean, I get it, right? It's a company's brand, reputation, IP. It's everything, right? But at the same time, I think the more that we can educate people, even those at our companies who are not cybersecurity focused or in a cyber role, the better, right? And when we can make it personal to them and make it simple, right? I mean, we all own phones and devices, and we probably are all getting all sorts of phishing scams and texts and emails, so when you can realize that personal lives we can be victims or susceptible to that, I think they start to want to understand it more and then put, more focus on how can they do their part in a company. But I also think not just, it's not necessarily that I think, but I'm more confident now too that companies will come forward. I think we had, an example, was that last year with a big rideshare company example that, let's look at who all does need to be at the table, right? You did mention several different people at a company. It's not just the CISO, right? And we can't point fingers and put blame. And yes, it is a brand, but at the same time, we should all be of the understanding that while we hope whatever company we're interacting with and putting data, providing our information to, we want to trust that they're secure, but we should also know that it's not 100%. So we, to some degree, have to take onus on the risk that we put right on ourselves by doing that. But then also, we need to know about it and we need to inform. And with the mandates and requirements in certain sectors and public companies and like the SEC mandates, that's going to have to be publicly disclosed. And I think that's good because the last thing you want, what was it? I would always say with Watergate, right? It's not the crime, it's the cover up, right?
Sure.
Don't cover it up because you need to know, you have to take the measures then for like the post breach, right? And just the understanding that every company is susceptible, doesn't matter how strong your barriers and measures are, it could happen. And so be as prepared as you can and then have an entire strategy around the communication.
You're right. And it is that piece of having that communication within your team and those others who are at the forefront of protecting the organization. How do you bring in new talent to your team? How do you grow that younger talent to bring them in and make them aware of not just the analytics that somebody might be starting out as a junior person doing analytical work, and maybe not aware of the big picture of what's going on across the organization?
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually kind of one of the reasons I started with a group of folks. We started a nonprofit called Whole Cyber Human Initiative, and we started that because first we were providing these services that were for free to veterans, but also to non-veterans. So basically anyone that's looking to enter into a cybersecurity career to have a starting point. And with a design course that has a mix of the hands-on practical skill sets and theory, and it's all free because we saw people spending thousands of dollars on certifications, not getting interviews, let alone a position in a cybersecurity role. So we go beyond just the technical skill sets and we work with them on how can they also really understand the business of a company, right? What enables the business, how cybersecurity can contribute to that. Building relationships with cyber professionals, their interviewing skills, promoting themselves appropriately on LinkedIn and resumes. And I think one thing that we work with companies who are open to changing the hiring process. And so I do think it's very important to take a look at, well, what's in your job description? Is it realistic? As well as you're not going to find the unicorn, right? They don't exist. So how can you look at the skill sets a person has, but then each company is different, but you do need to have some sort of level of training for your employees, right? And at all levels and hopefully pathways, right, for their career. And I think when you can have that sort of a model where you have a pathway for them to grow, you have the training and the skill sets that they need for their role, and job, and that's available and open to them, and you support that and can help provide that, right? Even if it's, it might be a cost to the company, but, larger companies can partner with a lot of these training providers, then you are going to be, make sure that your employees on your cybersecurity team just are more knowledgeable or more aware, have that understanding. And I think that's where it falls short a lot, is where they don't have access to that, or there's not necessarily that mandate, right, that they need to go through that. Because in cyber, we always have to be learning. We always have to be upskilling. Like, technology is changing super fast. The environments are, right? Now everything's in the cloud. So that's really important to have in place. And I think it can prevent, and I will always put an emphasis first on people, taking care of our people, right? People, processes, technology.
What's the name of the organization that you mentioned that helps people enter that field or enter the workforce?
Yeah, Whole Cyber Human Initiative.
I think you were kind of touching on it, Leah, just what when we're hiring cyber talent, is there one or two things that you're looking at specifically? Where you're talking about what a company needs to do for, new hires and bringing in new talent. Is there something that you're looking for, in that talent first before they join?
Yeah, aptitude, a willingness to learn, motivation. It's primarily those skill sets, right? If someone is putting in the work, right? They're doing on their own time, they're studying, maybe they are getting a certification, but they're always consistently upskilling, learning, and asking questions. They're motivated, they're driven, and they have the desire and the passion. Yes, I would personally take them and train them and give them on the job training. I mean, anyone can learn if they have that in them. I'm an example, right? I didn't start off with my career path and transition. It's possible. So those are the type of skill sets I look for. I mean, in addition to, yes, you do have to have certain skill sets that, with certain roles, but at the same time, people can be taught.
So it's not right now so important to only have the bachelor's degree or master's degree. Having the certs and the willingness just to learn and get in the trenches and do the work can be equally as important. That's awesome to hear.
Leah, what's your thought on the intersection of AI and cyber? And just to set the stage, you've been on the vendor side before. You've worked at A10, you've worked at Cisco, a couple other places where you're selling to professionals now, such as yourself. So now being in the buyer's seat, lots of vendors have the magic AI bullet, so to speak. And I think every day there's dozens of solutions, quote unquote, that are AI driven that can really solve your security problems. Anything from an AI pen test to AI tools that will look at your SIM and tell you all of the things that are going on. Where do you see that intersection, of AI and cyber, and where do you think that's going?
Well, it's definitely here and coming, and will continue to, right? Yeah. How did I know that we wouldn't get through this conversation without addressing AI? No, I mean, look, there's so many great things that AI can do, right, and can help us overall in our jobs. But like everything, we also have to understand the risks, right? And then, is there a policy in place? Are there guardrails? What does that look like? What's the plan? Does everyone in the company understand that? How is it being used? It's like with any new convergence, right? Like cloud, remember, that seems so long ago, yet it's still new to some companies. So it is a good thing, but it's also, like all good things, they also have their risks. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future. And I think it's important to really understand the benefits you can get from it, but then what do you need to put in to protect, right? And also, what does it mean when a company says AI? Because everyone says AI. What does that mean?
Do you have any favorite AI tools that you're looking at?
Well, I'm more focused on ChatGPT right now.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
No, I do. I really do like to. I will be a little bit. I'll mention one company, but I should preface I am on their board of advisors. It's a startup called Cloud Defense. So they are. They just added some AI capability to their data security solution in the cloud, leveraging LLMs, and basically can help detect those language models and. That's about all I could say on it because they're still a startup, but they have some pretty cool stuff that they're working on. So it'll be exciting to see where they go in the future.
With the AI piece, and you mentioned ChatGPT, if you haven't played around with the paid version yet, the 4.0 or the paid version, you can now add plugins to it.
Wow.
So
I haven't played around with the paid one yet.
I saw a plugin the other day that looked across tens of thousands of peer-reviewed scientific papers. So
Wow.
the explosion of the content, the third-party content that now these tools, not just ChatGPT but others, have access to, is really quite interesting. And I wonder at some point, if not right around the corner, we're going to be having conversations not only about the ethics of AI and data, but also really understanding what is truth as we look at and go beyond just the visual media of deepfakes now into the audio and video components of deepfakes. It kind of starts to question what is reality, because you could take an organization that curates a lot of content and then feeds that content, which may or may not be true, into an AI engine that then the user who is maybe looking for information and the AI picks up that maybe untrue information. Now you have a distorted sense of reality that is controlled by another entity. So that's, I think, right around the corner for us as cyber professionals. But I'm still trying to read and learn and stay on top of what's going on. If you have any insights or guidance, I'd love to hear it.
I mean, it is definitely moving fast, but I do think you're right about the ethics, right? And I think, again, like those guardrails that we need too, and especially when you think about who's the person using it, right? Because, like, to your point, I mean, right now, some of the emails we're getting, the phishing emails, they're harder to tell, right? Because now the spelling is a little bit better. It looks more realistic.
Yep.
So it's scary, but that person on the other end, right? Again, are they trained and knowledgeable enough to know, like, what if they look something up and it's about some port, right, or configuration, and then they accidentally release it, and then the code goes out there in the wild, and you're in a company who that's forbidden, right? And so you just broke policy. But so the things like that, we really have to be careful of. And I think, it does need to have a little bit of scrutiny at a company level. That's my view. I know some others are a little more lax, but everyone's open, has their right to their opinions, but it is scary at the same time. As much as it's fascinating, can be useful, can be helpful, it's scary. It's just, what do you believe anymore, right?
It really is. And as we talk about this, right, this is kind of the bleeding edge of cybersecurity and information security. And then on the other end, we have organizations that have trouble just keeping up with the current level of patching. So yes. Nick and I were just talking about this the other day as we were working with an organization that the date has come and gone when 2012 is end of life and end of extended support, right. But yet the environment still has 2012 in it. And it's, well, why is that? Well, there's these dependencies. And I mean, you could just get a list of excuses, right? And sometimes as the CISO, you just hear a ton of excuses about things that the dog ate my homework, right? The excuses you hear about why that particular server is still in the environment are pretty interesting and could fill volumes of books. But it's the dichotomy between we can't even stay on top of something that we knew about for 8 years was going to be end of life, and now we have new AI threats that are emerging right now. It's just the level of those two things are at opposite ends, and sometimes difficult to deal with and pivot the organization to be mindful.
Yeah, it's hard to see, right? Those of us in security, especially when you see some companies, and some of them are smaller, that they didn't even have a head of security, let alone, their person responsible for IT didn't know much about security. And then they get breached, and all of a sudden, and you just, I hope we see a day come where that is less and less, and people realize they have to, act now, not post breach. Ideally, right? Until you're in the news, and then it matters, but I want it to go the other way.
Never waste a good breach.
Right.
This adds to the overall stress of the job.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick and I were just talking about this too, where, and Nick, maybe you're best on this one because of your military background.
Yes. Yep.
And that crossover.
Yeah, Leo, our part of our conversation was, burnout, stress of the job. And, you don't have to be a military member to have stress or PTSD or something of the nature, right? It's relative to your industry, what you're used to. It's relative to the person. And, I think we can digress in the military portion, although I have had that experience. What we're seeing, all these new tools, these new threats around the world, whether it's the Middle East, Russia, whatever has it, it's something on our front doorstep here in America, wherever you are, there's a stressor. And I think, as a leader in the industry, is there a specific way that you're maybe navigating that stress for your junior employees, people coming into the industry? Is there some way that you're assisting them navigating those waters? Maybe the listeners could really gain some knowledge from you on that portion.
Yeah, that's a good topic and point. And interestingly enough, Nick, a lot of veterans that I know, they actually help me remain calm.
Okay.
I think because they've had to kind of overcome so much stress and learn how to deal with it better, right? And obviously when you're in a room and there's a bunch of people stressing, there's the calm person, you kind of want to gravitate to them, right? Yep. And personally, in my personal life, I've struggled with stress and anxiety, but, I had to learn how to figure that out. Like, if there's a lot of tools out there, things that we can do, diet, sleep, exercise, breathing techniques. There's an app for all of that now too, by the way, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
For me, I just always remember, I think it was actually one of my colleagues from my Cisco days would say, we are not doctors saving lives. And sometimes it feels like that. But when you look at the worst case scenario, what are the things that could happen? And I think you start there and then you break it down and say, but is that really that bad? No. And it could be fixed, right? And then you walk it back. I think that helps. But the number one thing is, I think, teaching them that the worst case scenario can be fixed. Remaining calm will help with the overall thinking and the problem solving. And, take the vacation. You have vacation time. Take the time. Don't burn out. Don't overwork. We all will do it to ourselves at some point in time, but choose the healthier alternative and try to do that, because it will help with the overall stress. Like, I work out every day. It doesn't matter if I have to wake up at 4 a.m. to get my workout in. I do it. But that helps me throughout the day to maintain a more calm demeanor. So I think we just need to pass those, tools and tricks on to people and emphasize that, things will happen and they can be bad. But the worst case scenario, if you really break it down, is that so bad after all? It might seem like it in that point in time, but if it can be fixed, it's not that bad. And then change the mental state, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You really got to find that purge valve, right? Like you're saying every morning or wherever it is, when you have your time, you're finding that stress relief in a workout. That's huge. It's so important. We did that obviously in the military. We're paid to work out, and stay in good shape. Right. So, and kind of one of your points, one of my senior leaders, further back was he would if something was going wrong, he would just ask me and look me right in the eye and say, is anybody dying? And
Right.
no, right. We're safe. Everybody's fine. Does it hurt right now? Yes, it's painful right now with this mistake that was made, but you also touched on it. We can fix that mistake and we can learn from that mistake and hopefully we don't make it again. Right.
Yeah.
So turning it into a teachable moment and teaching junior, IT staff to unpack their pack, right? Let's have that conversation. So communication, I think, is so big. And maybe earlier on, people weren't willing to have those conversations, or you couldn't talk uphill to senior leaders. So I think opening that door now, we're seeing that more often, that they're having those conversations is huge. And I think that's a little bit of a stress relief, and as far as training going to, just making us better, making that tip of the spear, because we're training that now, right? We've seen that kind of gap in the industry. And now the ones that we're training and we're training me are now leaders. So that's really interesting to see. But the stress is, I think what people are seeing is they're carrying that stress home because they're worried about the landscape right now. What didn't I do today that might impact us tomorrow? And that's more of the worry of the burnout. So that's what led me to your question. And, when I'm thinking about it myself, I compare it to the military because that's what I know. Yes. And when we're looking at it, I think we have to be okay with what we're doing, right? With the work we're doing, it's good enough, right? And learn how to unpack that pack, ask the questions and continue to learn. I could go on with this, forever, because it's something I always think about. And I had the opportunity to pass it along myself. And that was my advice as well. Pay it forward. And I was able to ask somebody, this is years ago now, is anybody dying? And their answer was no. And we moved on from it. And so, I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts on the stress, but I think that's the biggest uphill battle right now is the landscape, the AI coming in. It's all stressful. And that is probably the biggest area to navigate, is not only the tech and technology coming in, teaching, juniors, new technology, but navigating their day to day and how that looks. And maybe, Leah, this is a good portion. We've kind of been talking about all these different tools. What does your day to day look like, for you?
Yeah. Well, one thing you mentioned that I wanted to touch on is the perspective, right? So I remember, and I think that perspective, passing it on to people so that they can try to switch their mental state from stress to realizing, oh, not so bad. And I had a manager once, he grew up in India, and he said, look, where you walk, do you have to watch for landmines? Like, no, or where you have to, like, if you have a prescription for some medication you have to take, can you just go to Walgreens and get it? Yes. You don't have to be like 3 months without it, right? Because there's a shortage or whatever. And I think that perspective, it just makes you think about, there are worst case scenarios out there, and then look at, what you're in and how it can be, not as bad, right? And you have to do those mental tricks. And it is important to pass on to people, because I've definitely seen some people stressed out to the point where it's like that it's not worth it, right? It's not worth mental health. And thankfully, companies now, I think a lot more, at least compared to when I started my career, where you didn't even talk about mental health in the workforce, are addressing it and, are putting things into place that can help with that. Like Mastercard, we try to do like every couple months meeting free days, right? And things that just help and resources. Sure. So it's good. But I'm more focused lately on helping to build out some capabilities for one of our approaches for cyber risk. And, there is a lot of collaboration that has to be done with different teams, not just IT and security, but the business teams, the salespeople, all sort of different folks. And I think that's really important, because I remember as I was transitioning in my career, I was always getting stuck on, I didn't come from a background of like engineering and deep tech, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think more and more now, we see leaders in cyber, they need to be much more business focused, right? And looking at how do you enable the business and have a conversation, a narrative where it's understandable and relatable to an executive team. And, I'm hopeful that will continue, because I think, I hope it then breaks down the barriers and makes it easier for people to get into cybersecurity because of that.
Going back to the stress piece, to me, it seems like there was a line in the sand right around the pandemic, right? We were kind of working up, and then we went over this cliff with the pandemic, and we opened up this whole new work from home concept. Not that we couldn't work from home before, but some organizations were very resistant to employees working remotely. Didn't feel that they could get the job done not being in the office. And we saw a lot of resistance in some industries. And of course, there's industries where remote work just isn't possible. So when you look at the work from home piece and the component of bringing work home and the stress associated with not being able to leave things at the office, going from, if you're fortunate enough to have a large enough living space where you can have a separate office in your house, rather than working at the kitchen table, your job is just intermixed with your daily life, and having that separation. You don't even have the car ride home or the mass transit ride home to decompress before you get in the house. So any thoughts on that, Leah or Nick, around maybe tips or tricks of what you've found successful with yourselves or your teams as to make that transition when you're still in the same physical space?
I mean, I am fortunate because I have a home office, so I can shut the doors, close the laptops and shut the computers down. And then I think it's just, we have to have a lot more discipline now if we're in that scenario, in terms of, okay, it's 6 o'clock or whatever, shut it down, leave, right? And I guess if you're don't have a home office and you have to work from the kitchen table or whatever, remove it, and then just try to replace the thought with something else that's not work related. But you're right. I think it's really hard with that. I mean, I was always in an office until the pandemic. And now, gosh, I think it's been like nearly 3 years I've been working remote. And part of me, I'm actually going to our headquarters next week. I'm like excited to be in an office for a couple of days, not going to lie. But I try to really be diligent about not mixing it, right? And it's harder, but you have to do it. You have to absolutely do it.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in there too and throw my hat in the ring. I think we're all guilty of grabbing the laptop at 10 p.m., sending the email. There's times that's appropriate, right? And we have to do it. But being able to cut that off, I think, is important. But creating the routine, for me, I've been working from home for a while now, and very lucky to have that opportunity. But when I say creating the routine, in the morning, you put on the podcast for a half an hour, listen to a radio station. I mentioned before, we started recording that. I grew up in Minneapolis. I live in Texas now. One of my favorite radio stations, K-Fan, the morning show. I still put that on iHeartRadio on my phone. I might listen to it for 15 or 20 minutes in the morning. If I don't have a meeting very early, I'll put that on and listen to it. And that, kind of gets me into the day. Right. Yeah. And then so I still have that routine of driving in a vehicle, where you would listen to a podcast or a radio station or call a family member. So I think that's a little tidbit, but that I think has helped me create some sort of normalcy. And then, when you're done for the day, try to actually, shut the laptop screen and go about your day. So it sounds really simple, but I think if you're not actually having, a commute, create that environment somehow. And I think that does really help people separate, the work from home piece. And Eric, that is huge. I think that's probably a lot of the stress, right? Is just not being able to separate the two. So really interesting topic.
Could write a book on it.
Oh yeah. Could have a whole other episode on it.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
Series.
And Leah, what are some of the things that you're planning on your podcast your upcoming episodes, what are some of the things that you're thinking of talking about?
So it has been a wide mix. So I'm actually now hosting a podcast that's affiliated with a IT cyber leadership group called Elevate Exchange. They have chapters in Dallas and Houston. And so I was lucky enough to be asked to be the chair for this year, and then as part of that, host for their podcast. But the nice thing about that, for me anyways, is I will talk to a range, not just CISOs, not just those in cyber, right? But CIOs, CTOs. And they, I always ask what topics they want to cover. And it does range. It goes from AI to quantum computing to, you name it. And there are definitely some areas that I don't know as in depth as they do, but it gives me that opportunity to do some research, learn what I can, enough to be conversational about it, which I love, right? Because I need to get deeper in AI. I'm definitely not as deep as I'd like to be. And, I think we all need to do that to some degree. So it's a good range of conversations. We talk a lot too about what makes a good business leader. It's just a wide range. It's fun. I like getting to know different personalities and the different folks at those in those different roles.
And how often do the podcasts come out?
So we try to do it more frequently, like at least, once every couple of weeks or so, but it just depends on,
Sure.
I guess it's more of it's not necessarily a paid membership group, right? So, you're working with volunteers and trying to get everyone's schedules and times for the recordings. But
it depends on the current risk landscape.
Pretty much, yeah. Everyone's availability, stress level.
Right, exactly.
We just did one on storage and the future of storage. And the person that was on, Bill Harris, talked about different architectures, like using DNA storage and crystalline storage. And it's, as you think about, well, what's next? What's coming in the future? We could very easily be sitting on a podcast like this 20 years from now, and DNA storage is a real thing, which is just kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, Eric, it's funny that you mentioned that about storage, because when your name was mentioned as part of the company and being a co-host on this podcast, it's the same name as this guy who worked at NetApp. Remember NetApp storage company? I feel like I'm dating myself, but so his name was Eric Brown, and he was like their head of communications. And for a minute, I'm like, I had to look you up on LinkedIn. I'm like, is it the same one? And he transitioned into cyber.
I have worked with NetApp in the past, but never worked for NetApp.
Yeah.
Are you playing any pickleball, Leah?
I am not.
No, I have to ask because I just started playing, and it's a lot of fun. If you haven't tried it yet, what's that, Nick?
I said it is like the newest rage now.
It is actually. Yes, it is. I mean, some of the ESPN around here offer it now.
Funny.
It's a good way to meet people and relieve stress at the same time. There's a CXO, so CIOs, CISOs, CFOs, whatever, meetup here in the Twin Cities that gets together and plays pickleball. I'm trying to get myself on the invite list, but I haven't made it yet.
You got to get on that list.
I think that's a good portion too, Eric, that you're bringing up, is like the pickleball thing. To relieve stress for any leaders listening, get your team out to do an activity. Yes. It could be a board game, or go play pickleball, do something like that. Doesn't have to be work related. Team building, I think, right?
Culture.
It's something that's really overlooked. Yeah. Don't just do the pizza party in the office. Meet somebody at a brewery, right? And play games or pickleball, as Eric brought up. But so many good things you could go do. I think Eric and I and the team, last time I was in Minneapolis, we did axe throwing. I had some great conversation. And you can conversate about cybersecurity, but that team building, portion, stress relief, right? Throwing an axe, you might leave there a little less stressed.
The first time I did axe throwing was when I came to Dallas, and it was for a team building event.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It was very different.
Yeah. Very fun. A little dangerous, very fun.
Yeah.
That's a fun one. And the axe throwing place that we went to also served beer, so that was kind of interesting. They didn't want you to wear open-toed shoes, but you could drink beer. Which
Right.
No Crocs, but all the beer you can drink.
Drink it at your own risk.
We did an escape room before too, which was fun.
Oh,
that is a good one.
Yeah.
You got to come up. You got to come up to Minnesota.
I'll check it out. I'll bear 48 degrees.
Now that I know Leah's so close, and next time there's a meetup, I'm going to have to link up and with you in person, Leah. That'd be really fun.
It'd be fun. Yeah. Let me know. I'll let you know if I'm down in Houston ever.
Please do.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today, Leah. We've had a lot of good topics that we've covered. We were able to dive in on a couple and scratch the surface on others, but that just means more conversation down the road. So thanks again for coming on and talking to us and talking about the whole Cyberhuman initiative. And we'll definitely link to that in our show notes. But that's a place for folks to go who are looking to join or looking to have a cyber career. And it's a place for them to get started, get some education, network a little bit, and find their pathway into either an internship or a role in an organization as a cyber professional.
Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun. Good conversation.
In the current technology landscape, managing risk among other operations can be incredibly challenging. Let IT Audit Lab's experts provide a detailed, thorough examination in preparation for your upcoming audit. Contact us to learn more. Thanks to our producer, Joshua J. Schmidt, and our audio-video editor, Cameron Troy Hill. Please subscribe to be sure you don't miss our upcoming episodes. The audit is available wherever you source your podcasts. Thanks for listening.